Welcome to Kathryn Raakers' World. Innovation, culture, adventure, fashion and health, artists, destinations, traditions. This is Kathryn Raakers' World.
Hi, this is Kathryn Raaker of Kathryn Raakers' World, and our guest is one of our new experts, actually, and his name is Gerald Everett Jones. The new book is The Preacher Stalls the Second Coming. Stalls the Second Coming? Really? Welcome to our show. You're an award-winning author. You just put out books like crazy. You have your own podcast, am I correct?
Yes, that's true. And a blog on Substack, Thinking About Thinking. So thank you, Kathryn. Pleasure to be with you.
You're welcome. I'll tell you what, it's amazing having you on our show. Okay, it really is, because I just get the book yesterday and I haven't even cracked it yet. And I'm like, I'm so far behind in a sense, but I will start reading it today.
Well, I was reluctant to, I didn't want to call it Preacher Prevents the Second Coming because, you know, there are still some folks who might be looking forward. So
about that, don't you think?
Exactly.
So anyhow, let me ask you this question. It's this series has been out for how long now? And it's what book in the series, if you could tell our listeners?
This is the fourth in the series, Preacher Evan Wycliffe mystery thriller series. And that series is about 6 years old. This is my 14th novel, so it's been about 20 years of cranking out stories and, you know, entertaining stuff.
You ever get tired of doing it?
Well, you know, there is a certain morning after.
Morning after, that sounds good.
When you finish the revised draft and you take a breath and you go, will there be another one?
Yeah, I'm starting my audiobook and it's taken me 3 days. Today I'm actually starting the first 3 chapters of the audiobook. Well, and I've been talking about a long time. I just gotta do it, you know? It's just taking the time to do it, right?
Well, it's getting off the blank page, you know, it's, as my old editor used to say, put that button in a chair every morning. You know, it's just, you write whether you want to or not.
It's like you have to, when you work from home, which you probably do, you have your office at home, am I correct? And you have to get up and have a cup of coffee, at least I do, before I start my day. And then you put the pencil to the pen or the pen to the paper or whatever it takes to make it work. Am I right?
Well, I always now feel as though I can overcome the idea of facing a blank, so-called blank page. I used to write to outlines when I wrote business and technical books. I had a long career of doing quite a number of those. And it took me a while before I began to trust that if I didn't know where I was going, that might not be a bad plan. And when you write mysteries, one of the things, and you know, I've done romantic comedies, I've done other types of you know, literary fiction, historical fiction, but I will say that especially in mystery, if I can surprise and delight myself, then I should be able to surprise and delight you as well. So that's my goal, and I do have a group of colleagues that I consider beta readers, and I do push my revised drafts out to them early. And it more than one of them, without prompting, has said, of these Preacher Evan Wycliffe books, that they literally did not know what was happening up until the last page. They didn't have it all put together, and
Right.
neither did I, is my answer.
But what's really funny is I think I do that for about 4 authors. They send me, they want me to read it first, tell me what I think, and all this other kind of jazz, right? And I have to share with you one of my authors. When I said I'd like to print it out, he was printing out the whole book on paper, and I'm going like, why are you doing that? I can read it online, or not line, but I can read it. And he said, you mean I don't have to do that? And I said, no, you don't have to do that. I can deal with it. But he was thinking about me, which I thought that was really sweet, right? You don't do that for
I've had beta readers request, even before there were advanced reading copies, I've had them request paper manuscripts, and I've shipped it to them, when they requested it.
All right. Well, I think that's really very thoughtful, and well, he's a little older than me, actually. So, and he's one of these sweet guys, and he's like you. He can do a lot of different genres. And he was a college professor, before that, and a math professor. And he's just so funny. I love it. But, there are some things that I can't wait to find out exactly what's going to happen. Can you give us a little tiny preview?
This one was extremely complex in terms of the number of plot threads. All of the Preacher Wycliffe books are, he is a disenfranchised, to some extent, minister of the gospel in rural Missouri, and he is not a perfect person. He has an alcohol problem. He wrestles with taking oxy for his bad back. He has trouble keeping relationships. So, but the problem is, or the issue is, the story is that in these small towns where their gossip drives daily life, people tend to bring him problems that nobody else wants to solve, especially the sheriff, the county sheriff, who has no budget, is a somewhat disadvantaged African American who's not high in the political pecking order in that particular part of the world. So it's difficult for him to hang on to his job. And in this book, a televangelist, a cult leader, if you will, opens a compound in a rural area, and he's inviting disadvantaged and homeless people to come and live there on promises of food. One of the concerns is that he is advising them to fast. And there are rumors that from people who can't be let out, as it were, that he's actually advising them to starve, so that they'll be ready for the end times. Now, at the same time, Evan runs across a fellow who is telling him that actually, and he is a former government employee, he cautions him that there actually have been plans to fake the second coming of Christ. And in my early research, I found that it was actually our intelligence agency back in the era of Fidel Castro and Cuba. They actually intended a false flag operation to fake the second coming of Christ. Now, they were not so ambitious as to think they could convince the entire world, but they were going to anchor a submarine off the coast of Cuba, set off a bunch of spectacular light show fireworks, and on a loudspeaker announced that Fidel was the Antichrist. So the idea was to get the faithful Cubans to rise up against this communist leader, overthrow him. Now, that plan did not happen, at least as far as I know. It is written up in the Church Commission report. It is public information. This is not a secret of any kind. This was also during the era, if you remember your history, that actually there were Plan B was to somehow hand him an exploding cigar. They were
Well,
going to try.
wasn't there, Gerald? Wasn't there something that was said about Obama that he was the person that was going to bring in Christ in the second coming? I know I read that. And I know that at the time when he became president, they were talking about that.
That may have been what triggered this thought that they would that the fake operation would capitalize on. In other words, if there was this public perception that that was what was going on.
Right.
And certainly this is nothing new with authoritarian leaders saying, that they've got some kind of special channel to what might be happening. But the thing that really shocked me was that I read later that there is a conspiracy theory that continues to circulate that NASA and the deep state are planning a much more ambitious fake second coming, and it even has the conspiracy theory has a name, Project Bluebeam, and there was a book written about it, and there are people who are, I mean, I suppose this is, chemtrails, UFOs, I mean, whatever other, fantasies that you want to invest in.
Right.
But the idea here in this particular plot is that this cult leader has gotten his hands on some of this advanced technology, and he's using it to at least convince people that he's the reincarnation of John the Baptist, that he's got a special line to divine wisdom and do what I say. But of course, the problem is once he gets hundreds of people inside this camp, he can't afford to feed them. So the idea of advising them to starve, there are rumors that there are people expiring there. That's part of it. And you may know, of course, in our public discourse today, I mean, who would have imagined a few years ago that there would be any intelligent, responsible people talking about internment camps in the United States? But of course,
you know what they're doing. You know what they're doing right now, right?
Well, there's been rumors about them doing all kinds of things. What are you referring to?
I'm referring to with the Chinese coming in. What I'm referring to, Gerald, is that young men that are military age have come into the United States. They even gave them where they could get in a hole on the Texas border. And they had tents that they were carrying on their backs and everything. And the latest has been that what's going to happen is what China is planning at this point is that they're going to take over Taiwan. And once that happens, and this is just the latest thing I've heard, is that they would start bombing the grid, doing things to take over the United States. And it's my contention, just my thought, I may even write a book about this, I'm not sure yet, is that they've already planned where they're going to go, these globalists that want us to do everything. In other words, kill our cars, kill our whatever, right? And they're going to be on an island somewhere, not near anybody, and watch America go down the tubes. That's what I've heard.
Well, I will say as you know, my wife and I spent 2 years living in Kenya not that long ago. It was right before COVID. And I have seen the very visible efforts of the Chinese there in that, and this is a publicly announced program, is that their objective is to rebuild the ancient Silk Road that goes basically from Africa through Saudi Arabia and into China. And this is the ancient trade routes. This is where, there were camel caravans and going back centuries and centuries. As a matter of fact, the original slavers were the Arabs that were shipping slaves to India and to China. But what I saw was geothermal projects in Kenya for energy. And there were entire villages of tents for workers that had been brought over. There was Chinese workers that had been brought over. Now the Chinese um, approach, which also they did in rebuilding the railroad, the British railroad that went between Mombasa and Nairobi, which the intention is to reach into the heart of Africa so that um, materials and minerals and riches can be exported from places like Congo and Uganda, Rwanda, and bring them out to the coast so they can be shipped to Asia. But what China's approach typically, and they did this probably the first time they did it was Sri Lanka, but they loan the local government the money to contract with them for these major improvements, these infrastructure projects. And they request or demand as collateral some national asset. In the case of Sri Lanka, it was rights to the harbor, which they eventually got. In Kenya, for the railroad, Kenya promised them the access to the port of Mombasa, which is like the Long Beach or the Brooklyn Navy Yard of Kenya, and the Baltimore, if you will. And the Kenyan government was actually about to default on the railroad got built. The government was about to default on the loan, and the Kenyan Supreme Court came in and said, no, no, no. This agreement was incorrect. It's unconstitutional. Nobody had any business signing that. But in Ecuador, when I traveled in Ecuador not that long ago, it was 2015, the taxi driver told us, he was very proud. He said, well, we have a new subway system here in Quito. And he said, the Chinese built it. And he said, but the problem we're facing now is we promised them the Galapagos Island as the collateral.
Oh, no.
and living in Kenya, one of the things I learned was how to read between the lines in the news releases. And one of the things that I noticed, and I didn't see it reported anywhere other than just buried in some back pages, was at one point, Vice President Mike Pence visited the leadership in Quito. And this was after we'd taken our trip, after we'd been told about the presumed default and maybe the Galapagos was going to have casinos on it or something, right? So Pence shows up in Ecuador. Very soon after that, apparently, the Chinese loan was paid off. Within a matter of, I believe it was weeks, Julian Assange was expelled from the Ecuadorian embassy in London.
Really?
Does that sound like quid pro quo?
Yes, it does. I can't even imagine. Sometimes I think we're living in an unreal world.
Well, we're living in the post-truth world. That's true.
Yeah, that's true.
And everybody's got their different versions. And what I will say, it's a much more nuanced conversation in that, you remember when Kellyanne Conway was quoted as coining the term alternative facts. And it was, kind of a big joke. This is an oxymoron, and she's more intelligent than that, and she knows better. Well, but change that term, insert one more word two more words. Consider that there can be alternative sets of facts.
That's right.
If you exclude some salient facts from your report, suddenly you've got a version of events that may completely disagree with another alternative sets of facts. And my favorite example is you reverse cause and effect. When you issue a press release, especially if you are about to be accused of something,
right,
you accuse your opponent of it first. So it makes it look as though you are just doing a fair retaliation against something that's been done to you.
Right. Now, if I remember correctly, the last book, didn't he have a love interest, and for some reason it didn't work out. Am I right?
It's not that it didn't work out. He had love interest. It was the sister of the girl that he rescued, if you will, from the second book. And
Right.
her older sister had been working at as a cocktail waitress at the local casino, and
Mhm.
he developed an attachment for her and he married her. And the thing was that at the same time, in the third book, Preacher Raises the Dead, this is at the very beginning of COVID, and he goes from being a guest preacher, he actually has to step into being minister
Oh,
of the
a real
local
minister. I
church.
remember that.
And the issue there, the real concern is that she goes from being a cocktail waitress, and she's a pretty well-educated, she's not only gorgeous, but and she's totally, not naive. And
Right.
so she becomes the committee chair of what they call the Loving Embrace Committee. This is in the church. They're running the hot meals to the elderly. They're
Right.
collecting used clothes, whatever. And she her transition to church lady. She takes this really seriously.
Mm-hmm.
This is her new role. This is her obligation. She feels she owes him. She's going to back him up because this is going to a lot of responsibility for him.
Mm-hmm.
And she wants him to be, succeed in this role. And again, at COVID, he's got to be visiting the sick and the dying. He's got to not only people are still having weddings. Certainly there's funerals to officiate. So he's got to do all this. But number one, the pressure of that role starts getting to her. It's more than she can
Deal with.
stand. And then she's in an auto accident and she's suddenly in a coma.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Is
And
she still
so
in the coma? Is she still in
he
the coma in this one?
no. She's not only spoiler alert, she's come out of the coma in the third book, but her since she had been in the coma so long and he'd been visiting her the whole time, there are people in the community who are saying he must be a faith healer. So he's got to start living that down because clearly he doesn't want to be advertising himself that way. That's not the thing that he did that was miraculous, besides praying, of course, for his wife's healing. He decided that he would wear unlaundered clothes every time he went to see her. He kept his favorite sweatshirt in the closet, and he just, he would throw that on every time he went to see her. And he thought, okay, she can't see me. She might not be able to hear me.
But she can smell me?
Maybe she'll know I'm there.
Okay. All right.
Why not?
Yeah. So how'd you start this book then? Did she die?
No, she will completely ruin the third one. She ran off with the guy, her
Oh,
old
that's
boss
right.
from the casino.
That's right. That's right.
And
I
it was like
remember
she
that.
couldn't take the pressure. But the thing also was she felt as though she was kind of doing Evan a favor because he was getting caught up in a scandal with he'd actually gotten a gift of a fair amount of money, and he'd been actually able to build not only a mega church but a televangelist network. And so he was becoming something of a
Celebrity.
yes, but the problem was that there was just as much corrupt folks following him around wanting to leverage that it really ended up, it was one of those careful what you ask for situation, because then suddenly this church burns down and it might be arson, and it was like, was it the real estate developer that did it, or were these somehow extremist enemies of him, the church, whatever, or was he maybe somehow also whatever happened to be in the safe disappeared at the same time, didn't survive the fire. So
what happens now when he comes into this last book?
In the last book, he's been reduced to almost
Nothing.
nothing. She's left him. The farmhouse that he'd been gifted as the parsonage, he's moved out of. He doesn't like knocking about in this big old place, and he's hoping he can get it rented out so that there'll be some income coming back to the small church that he's serving. But he's in a trailer. He's in a beat up
Mobile
trailer.
home, trailer, mobile home, whatever you call it, right?
It's little more than a cubicle, and so and he's flirting with Jack Daniels again. He's trying to his back's hurting and he might be getting back on oxy. He's in the dark night of the soul, and so here he is. And one morning, here comes a knock on the door, and it's this old fellow with a European accent, and he looks like a homeless guy. And it's like it, and the nearest thing Evan can figure out is this guy's talking about the end times of the book of Revelations. And this was something that Evan had studied when he was at divinity school. So, I mean, he wrote papers on this. He knows. So maybe this guy's coming to see me because he heard me on the radio, but the guy looks like he needs a meal. I'll take him to breakfast. So they go to the hub of the community to come on in, downtown Appleton City, right on Main Street, the place where heaven can eat pancakes on, a comp meal for the preacher, right? Even if he doesn't have any money in his pocket. So he comes in with this homeless guy.
So is this the guy, excuse me, is this the guy that turns out to be this evangelist?
No.
Oh, no.
This is the guy who who probably came to warn him about the evangelist. This is the scientist who really understands how the fake second coming would be produced, but we don't find that out until considerably later. But
we don't want to tell everybody everything yet.
Well, but see, no, this is still the end of the first chapter hasn't ended yet. When the guy excuses himself from breakfast, he's had his eggs and pancakes, and he says, "Oh, I got no smokes." So he's going to head across the street to the drugstore. He gets out the door and he takes 2 steps and he gets run over by an F-150 pickup truck. So the question is,
you sure that this wasn't his guardian angel?
Well, I think we might we might wonder about that.
Well, I would wonder about that because sometimes that happens to me where things happen that you're not sure about.
Well, hopefully they're not involved in vehicular homicide right away.
No, I don't mean it like that, but that it happens. And, we don't think beyond that sometimes. For instance, I'm going to give you for instance. One of my friends who was a preacher just recently died. Okay. And I was so worried about him that I couldn't sleep one night. And all of a sudden I was wide awake. My husband was asleep. And all of a sudden I started seeing all these white lights coming across. And I woke my husband up. I said, I can't believe this is happening. And then I thought to myself, he's dying. He's died because he was in the hospital and hospice. And when I was having this, the angels were taking him to heaven. So sometimes God puts things out there, but we just have to be aware of it.
Well,
right?
The spiritualist Esther Hicks, and she and her husband Jerry did books and tours about inner voices and things that they had channeled from wisdom, extraterrestrial wisdom, if you will, angelic wisdom. But Jerry died, and Esther continued to be on the lecture circuit, and she claimed that Jerry would join her from time to time, that she was aware of his presence. And the phrase that she used, which is actually a phrase that I use in the book from time to time, is Jerry just stepped out of the movie. The idea that one would go from one state of existence to another, from one dimension to another, that's one of the things that this crazy eccentric fellow is trying to tell Evan, because he's very much in in tune with virtual reality. It's like you really can't believe anything you see anymore. We're talking about third dimension virtual reality without goggles. We're talking about things that might be just in front of your own eyes. You might think that something occurred and it didn't.
Right. Well, the other thing is, one of the things that we have to not forget is that a lot of times God talks to us, but we don't listen. I mean, seriously, you'll be sitting there and all of a sudden you get this feeling. And, I have always believed, Jerry, and I treat everyone the same way. I don't care how rich, how poor you are. It doesn't matter, because maybe one day Christ or God comes to the door and knocks on the door, and he looks like this humble person, and we push him away. I don't do that. I open the door, unless he's got a knife or something, he's going to kill me or something. But my point is that we never know, but we have to start listening to the answer of our prayers or whatever. I cannot wait to read the book. The minute I finish with this, I'm going to start reading it, because
Well,
it got me
prayer,
so
you
impressed.
talk about the answer to prayer. I will say, and this is, Evan can be accused of being agnostic. I would not say he's agnostic. I would say, however, he's a perpetual doubter. And I think you can't really be a human being without having mornings when you get up and you're really not sure whether you're on the right path or whether,
Right.
There's anybody paying attention. But one of the things that is in Evan's core beliefs is that there's really only one prayer. And that prayer is, God, I understand that I already have everything I need.
Right.
Now, that can be very, very difficult to believe. And that can be difficult to act upon. But in fact, that really can be that is the test of faith, is that, of course, I mean, it's not a matter of you're gonna pray and then God's gonna sit there and go, okay, do I really need to micromanage the situation? Am I gonna flip a coin? Am I gonna figure out who wins the Super Bowl? God don't do that. God doesn't worry about who wins the Grammys. Okay, he's rooting for.
We've come to the end of our show because you have an appointment and I don't want you to miss it. Okay.
As they say in Hollywood, I have a bigger name on the other line. Kathryn,
Yeah, excuse me. I'm sorry. And this isn't the end of this series, is it?
This is the fourth in the series, and this takes Evan to a place where we could well wonder what might happen next. Yes.
Right. I want to say thank you so much for joining me. You're always such a pleasure to have. It's always happy.
I get infected with your enthusiasm. I confess, I'm addicted.
Well, that's what's good. If you can laugh, you're still living, right? Anyhow, thank you so much, Gerald. I really appreciate it. Where can people go on your web? You have a website, right?
That's GeraldEverettJones.com, just as it's spelled on the book.
Right. I love your sign. I think I'll get one like that for mine of the book. Okay. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure. And don't forget to go to our website at KathrynRaakersWorld.com. You'll see Let's Just Talk, our radio show, and our cooking show, The Chef You and I. We'll see you soon.
In a wonderful world it is.
And that's